Marry my daughter or lose everything? My answer is no.
He can't do that.
The first time Victor Lang asked Daniel Cross to marry his daughter, there were 8 people in the room. 2 lawyers at the foot of the bed, rain beating against 40-foot windows, and a silence so sharp it felt like broken glass in the air. Victor was dying, the way powerful men usually did, surrounded, expensive, and furious about it. His hospital bed had been moved into the master suite of the Lang estate because, according to the family, he deserved dignity. But there was nothing dignified about the machines hissing beside him, or the yellow tint under his skin, or the way his fingers kept clawing at the blanket like he was still trying to hold on to one last deal. Daniel had only come upstairs because the night nurse said Mr. Lang was demanding to see him by name. That alone had put everyone on edge. Men like Victor Lang didn't call for the estate manager unless something was broken, leaking, or on fire. Daniel stepped into the room, still wearing his work jacket. There was mud on his boots from the lower gardens. He'd spent the afternoon repairing a stone wall before the storm came in. His son, Owen, was downstairs in the staff kitchen, finishing homework at the table with a grilled cheese and a juice box because Daniel's shift had run late again. Daniel should have been thinking about insulin refills and school pickup and whether the old truck would survive another winter. Instead, the most powerful man in the state looked right at him and said, in a voice that sounded like dry paper being torn in half, "Marry my daughter, or lose everything." For a second, nobody moved. Then Victor's brother Graham actually laughed. Not a full laugh, just that ugly little burst people make when something so insane happens, their cruelty beats their confusion to the surface. Amelia Lang didn't laugh. She was standing by the window in a black silk blouse, arms folded, face unreadable. Victor's only daughter, 34. Sharp cheekbones, steady eyes, the kind of stillness that made other people nervous. The tabloids called her cold. The board called her difficult. The family called her unstable when they thought she couldn't hear. Daniel called her Miss Lang because he'd worked on that estate for 3 years and she'd never once given him permission to call her anything else. He looked from Victor to the lawyers, then to Amelia, waiting for somebody, anybody, to say this was the medication talking. Nobody did. Victor coughed, winced, and lifted one trembling hand. "You heard me." Daniel felt his heartbeat slow down instead of speed up. That was the strange thing about true disaster. Sometimes it didn't arrive like panic. Sometimes it arrived like perfect clarity. He knew exactly what Victor meant by lose everything. The cottage Daniel and Owen lived in sat on Lang property. His health insurance came through Lang Holdings. Owen's insulin pump supplies came through that insurance. His salary was modest, but it was steady. It was the first steady thing Daniel had managed to build since the year his wife died. Victor knew that. Of course he knew that. Graham shifted in his chair, almost enjoying himself now. "Well, Daniel," he said, dragging out the name like they were old friends. "That seems like quite an opportunity." Daniel didn't look at him. He kept his eyes on Victor. "Why me?" "Because," Victor whispered, "you're the only man in this house who can't be bought." That landed harder than the threat. Even Amelia turned from the window then. But that wasn't even the beginning. Because Daniel knew Victor Lang's type. Men like him only praised honesty when they needed to use it. One of the lawyers cleared his throat. "Mr. Lang, perhaps this conversation should be—" "Quiet," Victor snapped, the old force flashing through the sickness. The room obeyed. Daniel thought about Owen downstairs. 10 years old, too observant for his own good. Still checking the front door some nights, like grief had a schedule. And maybe his mother would finally come home if he waited long enough. He thought about the promise he made at Sarah's grave, that he would never let their son grow up believing survival mattered more than character. Then he looked back at the dying man in the bed and said, very calmly, "Then I lose everything." The room changed. It actually changed. Graham stopped smiling. One of the lawyers blinked. Victor's niece muttered, "What?" under her breath, like she'd misheard him. Daniel went on before anyone could interrupt. "You can take the job, the cottage, the insurance, every last thing with your company logo stamped on it. But I won't teach my son that marriage is a business transaction, and love is just another contract for rich people to wave around." The rain hammered harder against the glass. Amelia's face didn't soften exactly, but something in her eyes shifted. Victor stared at Daniel for a long moment. Then, unbelievably, a rough little sound came out of him. Not anger, approval. "Get out," Victor told the family. Nobody moved. Victor raised a shaking finger toward the door. "All of you, out." Graham stood first. "You're in no state to make legal decisions." "I built the company that keeps you drunk," Victor said. "I'm in exactly the state I choose to be." That did it. The family filed out in a storm of silk, perfume, and offended inheritance. Amelia was the last to move. She paused near the door, glanced at Daniel once, and left without a word. When the room finally emptied, Victor sagged back against the pillows. For the first time, he looked every bit as sick as he actually was. Daniel stayed where he was. "If this is some kind of test, you're too old for games." Victor gave a weak half-smile. "Good. I was hoping you'd still be angry." Daniel didn't answer. Victor's breathing rattled. "If you had said yes in front of them, I would have known I was wrong about you." Daniel felt a fresh wave of disgust. "So that was a test?" "No," Victor said. "It was desperation." He gestured toward the chair beside the bed. Daniel didn't sit. Victor seemed too tired to care. "My daughter loses controlling interest in the company the moment I die unless she has a legal family partner listed in the trust." Daniel frowned. "That makes no sense." "It made sense to my mother," Victor muttered. "She believed power should never be held alone. Thought a spouse or partner would act as a moral brake. Old family trust. Old family paranoia. We tried to challenge it years ago. Courts upheld it. And you want me to be the brake?" Victor looked straight at him. "I want someone beside Amelia who won't sell her to the wolves." Daniel almost laughed then, but there was nothing funny in him. "You think blackmailing me makes me trust you?" "No," Victor said. "I think blackmailing you forced you to show me who you really are." That should have sounded clever. Instead, it sounded like something a man tells himself when he's run out of honorable options. Victor's eyes drifted to the storm outside. "Graham has been waiting 20 years for me to die. Once he gets the board, he will strip everything. Pension funds, safety reserves, the clinic. He'll burn the place warm and call it efficiency." Daniel didn't move. Victor swallowed with difficulty. "I know what was done to you." That hit like a fist. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Do you?" "Yes. 3 years earlier, Daniel had been a structural engineer at Lang Infrastructure. Not brilliant, not famous, just good, careful. The kind of man who checked numbers twice because people stood underneath the things he signed his name to. Then came Warehouse 14, a rushed project, cheap steel, missing reports. Daniel refused final approval. 2 weeks later, the roof section failed during a storm. Nobody died by some miracle, but 3 workers were badly injured, and Daniel was blamed anyway. The company buried him. He lost his job, then his reputation, then the insurance that had covered Sarah's treatment. By the time he found temporary work and swallowed his pride enough to ask for help, the cancer had already spread too far. She died in a hospice room that smelled like antiseptic and lavender spray, apologizing for leaving him alone with a 5-year-old boy. Daniel had never forgiven the world for making her apologize. Victor closed his eyes for a second, like the effort of speaking cost him blood. You were right about the steel. Daniel's whole body went still. What? Victor opened his eyes again. You were right. Graham's division altered the reports. I learned the truth too late. That's a lie. I wish it were. Daniel took a step back. You knew? You knew and you still let me carry it? Victor's gaze dropped. And in that tiny motion, Daniel got the answer. Not all of it, but enough. No one saw this coming. The rage that rose in Daniel wasn't loud. It was worse than loud. It was cold. My wife died, he said, and his voice barely sounded human. Do you understand that? She died while your company protected itself. Victor's mouth trembled once. I know. No, you don't. The old man stared at the blanket over his legs, and for a moment he looked less like a titan and more like what he really was. A failing man at the end of a lifetime of choosing the company first. I hired you here because I was trying to make something right, Victor said. Daniel almost choked on the bitterness of that. You gave me a cottage and a mower and called it justice? I gave you the only security I could without exposing Graham before I had proof enough to finish him. Daniel laughed then, one short, terrible sound. So now I'm supposed to marry your daughter as part of your last-minute redemption? Victor met his eyes again. No. I'm asking you to protect the only decent thing I have left. Daniel didn't realize he'd clenched his fists until pain shot up his wrists. He should have walked out right then. Maybe he would have. But the bedroom door opened suddenly, and Amelia stepped back inside. Neither man had heard her return. She looked at her father first, then at Daniel, and whatever she saw on Daniel's face told her enough. I told you not to do it this way, she said quietly. Victor shut his eyes. Amelia looked at Daniel. I'm sorry. It was such a simple thing. 2 words. Soft. Direct. And somehow it hurt more than Victor's confession. Daniel left without answering either of them. Victor Lang died before sunrise. By noon the next day, Graham Lang had replaced sympathy with paperwork.
Daniel was called to the main office, thanked for his years of service in the tone people used when they meant inconvenience, and informed that the cottage had to be vacated within 72 hours due to estate restructuring. His insurance would expire at the end of the month. There would be a severance package if he signed a non-disclosure agreement regarding any private matters overheard on the property. Daniel read the document once,
set it on the desk, and walked out. He packed through the afternoon while Owen sat on his bed pretending not to listen. Kids always know more than adults think, especially kids who've already had their world split open once. By evening, the cottage looked like grief did after enough years had passed. Not gone, just boxed up. Owen held a framed picture of his mother and asked, "Are we getting kicked out because you made somebody mad?" Daniel folded a sweater too carefully. "Maybe. Did you do the right thing?" That question landed harder than any threat Graham Lang could have made. Daniel looked at his son. Skinny shoulders, serious eyes, Sarah's mouth. "Yes," he said. Owen nodded once. "Okay." That was all. No complaint, no tears, just, "Okay." As if that settled it. Daniel had to turn away for a second because the room blurred. They moved into a 2-bedroom apartment above a hardware store on the edge of town. The radiator banged at night. The kitchen window didn't close all the way. Owen said it smelled weird, but not evil, which Daniel took as a win. He started calling old contacts for work. Most were polite. A few were kind. None had anything permanent. 3 days later, a black sedan pulled up outside the building. Daniel saw it from the window and felt every muscle in his back lock. Amelia Lang stepped out alone. No driver, no assistant, no sunglasses to hide behind. Just Amelia in a gray coat, hair tied back, carrying a file folder under one arm, like she was about to deliver bad news to a stranger and had decided not to soften it. Daniel almost didn't buzz her in. Almost. She climbed the narrow stairs, took one look at the peeling paint in the hallway, and said, "I'm not here on my father's behalf. He's dead. I know." He let that sit between them. Then he stepped aside. The apartment was small enough that there was nowhere to place discomfort. It just stood in the middle of the room with everybody else. Owen was at the table drawing spaceships. He looked up, recognized Amelia from the estate, and went still. Amelia surprised Daniel by walking straight to him. "Hi, Owen," she said. Owen nodded. "I like your ship." He glanced at his paper. "It's not a ship, it's a mining station." Amelia crouched slightly to look closer. "That's worse. More places to break." Owen's mouth twitched. Daniel noticed. He hated that he noticed. Amelia straightened and handed Daniel the file. "This is a copy of the trust clause, my father's letter, and the board agenda scheduled for next Thursday." Daniel didn't touch it. "If this is another proposal, save your breath." "It isn't." She paused. "Not exactly." He took the file anyway. Inside was a letter in Victor's unsteady handwriting. "Daniel, if you are reading this, then I failed to earn the time required to ask properly." That was how it began. The rest was worse. Victor admitted more than Daniel thought he would. Not everything, not enough, but enough to stain every page. He confirmed Graham's division manipulated internal safety reports on Warehouse 14. He confirmed Daniel's objections were buried. He confirmed he chose silence over scandal. Then came the part Daniel had to read twice. "I watched what happened to you after. I told myself I was preserving a company that employed 40,000 people. Men like me are very skilled at calling cowardice responsibility. By the time I was ready to correct it, your wife was already gone." Daniel had to stop there. His hands were shaking. Amelia's voice came from somewhere far away.
I didn't know the full story until 2 weeks before he died. Daniel looked up. Did you know enough? She held his gaze. Enough to hate him for it. Not enough to fix it. He looked back at the page. My daughter thinks I chose you because you are honorable. I did. But that is not the only reason. You are one of the few men I have ever known who still understands that a signature can carry a soul with it. Daniel folded the letter closed before he could tear it in half. What do you want from me? He asked. Amelia didn't answer right away. She glanced toward Owen, who had gone back to drawing but was listening with the supernatural skill all children possess. Then she said, My father was right about one thing. If Graham gets the company, he'll gut it. He's already drafted layoffs. He's selling the clinic. He wants the employee health fund collapsed into private restructuring so he can optimize obligations. That means people who've worked there for 30 years lose coverage. Daniel said nothing. Amelia went on. Under the trust, if I have a legal spouse or registered family partner at the time of probate, the voting block transfers to me instead of Graham's interim board. Daniel gave a tired laugh. So we're back here again. No, she said. We're here differently. That made him look at her.
Her face had changed since the estate. Not softer, just stripped down, like grief had burned away the need to posture. I'm not threatening you, she said. I'm asking. Why me? Because my father trusted you. That's not good enough. I know. A beat passed. Because I trust the man who looked a dying billionaire in the eye and said no. The room went quiet again. Owen's pencil stopped moving. Daniel felt something dangerous stir in his chest. Not belief. He wasn't stupid enough for that. But recognition, maybe. The kind that comes when another wounded person tells the truth so plainly it has nowhere to hide. Amelia took a breath. 90 days, civil marriage, ironclad prenup, no claims on my personal assets, no obligation beyond public appearances required for the probate challenge. After control transfers, we dissolve it. Daniel stared at her. She added more quietly, And if you say no, I leave and never ask again. What happened next changed everything. Because Daniel wanted to refuse. God, he wanted to. He wanted to tell her no for Sarah, no for pride, no for every man in an expensive suit who had ever treated ordinary lives like spare parts in a larger machine. But then Owen spoke from the table. Would they close the clinic for kids too? Amelia turned. Yes. Even if they're sick? Yes. Owen looked at Daniel. That's bad. Daniel swallowed. I know. Owen stared at the mining station he'd been drawing. Mom used to say if a choice makes you feel sick, it doesn't always mean it's wrong. Sometimes it means it matters. Daniel had to grip the back of a chair. Amelia looked away, giving him the dignity of not witnessing how hard that hit. He still said no that day. Not because he didn't care, because he cared too much. After she left, he sat at the kitchen table long after Owen went to bed, reading Victor's letter until the words blurred into a confession too late to be useful. The next morning, the pharmacy rejected Owen's pump sensor refill. Insurance inactive pending transition. Daniel paid what he could out of pocket and left with less than half of what they needed. By Friday, he had sold Sarah's old camera, his watch,
and the last set of tools he'd kept from his engineering days. By Saturday, Graham Lang announced a temporary suspension of the Employee Medical Fund. By Sunday, Daniel saw Amelia at the clinic. He had gone there because one of the nurses called and said supplies were already being boxed up. She wasn't dressed like an executive. No heels, no security.
Just jeans, a dark sweater, and her hair tied carelessly as she helped move pediatric files into storage to keep them from being destroyed. A little girl in a yellow mask clung to Amelia's hand while Amelia bent down and told her, "No, the fish tank is not going to die. I already bullied someone into taking it home." The girl nodded solemnly. "Good." Daniel stood in the doorway, watching. Amelia looked up and saw him. There was no surprise in her face. Maybe she'd expected he would come. Maybe she understood him better than he wanted to admit. "I'm not asking again," she said. Daniel looked around at the boxed toys, the stripped walls, the nurses trying not to cry while pretending they were just busy. Then he said, "I have conditions." Amelia didn't smile, but something in her shoulders loosened. "Good," she said. "So do I." They got married at City Hall on a Tuesday morning. No flowers, no family, no music. Just a clerk who had clearly stopped being interested in other people's drama years ago. A tired judge, Owen in a blue sweater too small at the wrists, and Amelia standing across from Daniel in a cream-colored coat that looked like it cost more than his first car. The tabloids found out before lunch. By dinner, every headline in the city had some variation of "Gold Digger Groom," "Dying CEO's Last Maneuver," and "Mystery Widower Marries into Billions." Daniel stopped reading after the first hour. Amelia didn't seem to read any of them at all. They moved into separate bedrooms in the townhouse Amelia kept downtown. It was elegant without being warm, full of books, dark wood, and windows that overlooked the river. Owen got the brightest room because Amelia insisted children shouldn't wake up facing brick walls if it could be helped. Daniel expected it to feel like a transaction. At first, it did. They discussed schedules, appearances, legal meetings, and how much truth to give the press. They spoke politely, carefully, like two people carrying lit matches through a room full of gas. But life has a way of sneaking past arrangements. Owen started leaving his school bag by Amelia's office door because she was good at explaining math without making him feel stupid. Daniel noticed Amelia never raised her voice with staff, not once. Amelia noticed Daniel checked every stair rail, outlet, and window latch in the house without thinking, as if safety was a language his hands spoke even when he was tired. One night, Daniel came downstairs at 2 a.m. and found Amelia sitting at the kitchen island in the dark, staring at nothing. She didn't jump when he entered. She just said, "I couldn't sleep." Neither could he. He poured coffee neither of them needed. After a long silence, he asked, "Why didn't you marry someone from your world? Someone simpler?" Amelia laughed without humor. "Because every man my family approved of wanted the company more than they wanted me. And every man I actually loved learned very quickly what my family does to people they can't control." Daniel leaned against the counter. There was someone. There always is. She looked down at her hands. He left after Graham had him audited, followed, and professionally buried. He said loving me felt like standing on train tracks waiting to see which part of his life got hit first. Daniel had no answer to that. Amelia added, almost too quietly to hear, "I didn't blame him." Something in him shifted again then, just a fraction. And then, something unexpected happened. The more Daniel watched Amelia under pressure, the less she resembled the stories told about her. She wasn't unstable. She was exhausted. There was a difference. The board meetings got uglier. Graham challenged the marriage as coercive. The press camped outside the townhouse. Owen came home from school one afternoon with a split lip because some boy said his dad married a rich woman for cash, and Daniel must have done it before with the dead one, too. Daniel saw red so fast it scared him. But it was Amelia who knelt in front of Owen, put an ice pack to his mouth, and said, "People who have never built anything always think everyone else is stealing." Owen sniffed. "That doesn't even make sense." "It rarely does." He looked at her for a long moment, then leaned, just slightly, into her hand holding the ice. Daniel had to look away. The major blow came 3 days before the probate hearing. A packet was delivered anonymously. Inside were copies of old internal emails from the Warehouse 14 disaster. Daniel sat at Amelia's desk, reading them one by one, while his skin went cold. Graham had altered the safety reports. Victor had seen enough to suspect it. And then, there it was. An approval chain. Delayed response. Legal strategy notes. Not from Amelia. From Victor. He hadn't just known. He had chosen the cover-up. Line by line. Signature by signature. Daniel's vision blurred with rage. When Amelia came home, he was still sitting there. She saw the papers and stopped breathing for a second. "You knew," he said. "No." "Don't lie to me." "I'm not." He stood so fast the chair hit the floor. "He knew exactly what happened to Sarah's insurance after I was blacklisted. He knew, and he still buried it." Amelia looked wrecked. Truly wrecked. "I found those files this morning, too." Daniel laughed, broken and furious. "And you didn't call?" "I was driving here." He dragged both hands over his face. "Your father destroyed my life, then tried to use me to save his legacy. Do you understand how sick that is?" "Yes," she said, and there were tears in her eyes now, real ones she clearly hated. "Yes, I do." He turned away because if he looked at her, some part of him might soften, and he didn't want softness. He wanted something to break. Instead, Amelia walked to the desk, took a folder from her bag, and placed it in front of him. Inside were signed annulment papers. Daniel stared at them. Amelia's voice shook once, then steadied. "You can leave. I won't stop you. I'll testify that the marriage was my request alone and that you acted in good faith. Graham will probably still win, but he won't take Owen's name through the mud if I can help it." Daniel looked up. She wiped at her face angrily. "My father used people until the end. I won't." That was the moment. Not the wedding, not the headlines, not the late-night coffee in the dark. That. A woman raised in a family built on leverage had just handed him freedom when using him would have been easier. And suddenly Daniel understood what Victor had failed to say the right way. Amelia wasn't the empire. She was the one surviving it. The next day, Graham made his move. He asked Daniel to meet privately in a conference room at Lang Holdings before the hearing. The room smelled like leather, money, and old lies. Graham poured 2 glasses of water and acted as if they were discussing golf memberships. "This doesn't have to be unpleasant," he said. "Annul the marriage.
State that Victor was heavily medicated and Amelia manipulated you. In return, I restore your health coverage for 5 years, clear your name with a consulting position, and set up an education trust for your son." Daniel said nothing. Graham smiled thinly. "Be realistic. You don't belong in our war." Daniel finally spoke. "You mean your theft?" Graham's smile vanished. "I mean survival. My brother was sentimental at the end. Sentiment is expensive." Daniel thought of Sarah in hospice, of Owen's split lip, of Amelia handing him signed papers with shaking hands. Graham leaned forward. "Take the deal. Men like you don't get many chances to turn pain into comfort." Daniel stood. Graham's voice sharpened. "If you walk out of here, your son pays the price." Daniel turned slowly. "No," he said. "If I take your deal, my son pays the price. He just pays it in pieces you can't see." The probate hearing filled the old board chamber by noon. Lawyers, reporters,
Family members dressed in black, like they were still pretending to mourn. Amelia sat at one table in a navy suit, perfectly still. Daniel sat beside her. When the challenge began, Graham's counsel attacked fast. The marriage was opportunistic. Victor was incompetent. Amelia had manipulated a vulnerable employee. Daniel was there for access, money, revenge. At one point, the attorney looked straight at Daniel and asked, "Mr. Cross, did you marry Mrs. Lang for love?" The room held its breath. Amelia didn't look at him. Daniel could feel every camera pointed his way. He could also feel Owen's little hand from that morning, grabbing his before school and saying, "Whatever happens, do the right thing first, then come get me." Daniel stood. "I didn't marry Amelia Lang for money," he said. The attorney smirked. "That wasn't my question." "I know." Daniel turned then, not toward the lawyer, but toward the board, toward Graham, toward the whole polished machinery of people who believed power belonged to whoever had the fewest scruples. "I married her because a dying man tried to force me, and I said no," Daniel said. "I married her later because I learned the people trying to stop her were the same people who buried worker injuries, altered safety reports, and destroyed families to protect stock prices. Mine included." The room erupted. Graham half rose. "Objection!" Daniel pulled a folder from his briefcase. "I have authenticated internal communications and executive approvals regarding Warehouse 14 and subsequent legal concealment. They've already been submitted to the court and forwarded to regulators this morning." That landed like a bomb. Graham went white. Amelia turned to Daniel, stunned, truly stunned. He hadn't told her. Not because he didn't trust her, because he wanted the truth to arrive before anyone could stop it. The attorney sputtered something about stolen documents. Daniel didn't care. He looked at Graham and said, clearly enough for every reporter in the room to hear, "You offered me everything yesterday if I lied for you. But I already told your family once. If the price of keeping my life is becoming one of you, then I lose everything." For the first time all day, Amelia's control cracked. Not publicly, not much. Just enough for Daniel to see her inhale, like someone who had spent years underwater and had finally found air. The rest moved fast. Too fast, really. Emergency motions, temporary injunctions, regulatory review, trading freeze recommendations, Shocked silence from board members who suddenly remembered they had consciences when federal language entered the room. And then Victor's final recorded statement was admitted. Daniel hadn't known it existed. Amelia hadn't either. In it, Victor confessed to withholding decisive action on the Warehouse 14 fraud to protect the company from immediate collapse. He named Graham. He apologized, awkwardly, imperfectly, too late, for what had been done to Daniel and others like him. He also affirmed, in no uncertain terms, that Amelia was the rightful successor, and that any attempt to declare her unfit was the work of cowards who confuse control with leadership. It wasn't redemption. Nothing so neat. Sarah was still dead. The lost years were still lost. Damage does not become justice just because it's finally admitted under good lighting. But it was enough to crack the machine. Graham was removed pending investigation. Several board members resigned before sunset. The clinic's closure order was suspended. The employee health fund was preserved under court supervision. Amelia assumed interim control by week's end. The city called it a corporate earthquake. Daniel just called it expensive truth. A month later, the townhouse felt different. Not happier exactly, but lived in. Owen's mining station drawing had been taped to the refrigerator beside 3 official memos, a grocery list, and a note in Amelia's handwriting reminding Daniel that if he bought generic coffee again, she would consider it a hostile act. They laughed more than either of them expected. Not all the time. Life wasn't suddenly easy. There were lawyers, hearings, investigations, and more reporters than any decent person should ever have to tolerate. Some nights, Amelia came home so drained she could barely speak. Some mornings, Daniel woke up angry at Victor all over again. Grief doesn't move in straight lines. Neither does trust. But one evening, after Owen had gone to bed, Daniel found Amelia on the balcony overlooking the river. The wind pushed loose strands of hair across her face. He stepped beside her and held out 2 mugs. She took one. "If this is the generic coffee, we're getting divorced." He huffed a laugh. "Good coffee, don't start." They stood there in the cold for a while. Below them, the city kept moving like cities do, indifferent, lit up, pretending all stories are small from far enough away. Finally, Amelia said, "The annulment papers are still valid for another 30 days. Daniel looked at the river. "I know. You can go whenever you want." He turned then. She wasn't guarded. That was the surprising part. She wasn't asking for reassurance either, just telling the truth and leaving him room inside it. Daniel set his mug down on the railing. "Do you want me to go?" Amelia's throat moved. "No." It was barely louder than the wind. He took that in. Every version of his life seemed to stand there with him for a second. The engineer he'd been, the husband he'd lost, the father learning how to survive in smaller and smaller circles until survival itself felt like a room with no windows. Then he said, "I don't want Owen growing up thinking the only real part of this was the pain." Amelia looked at him. Daniel smiled, tired and honest. "And I don't want the first decent thing that happened to me after Sarah died to end because it started badly." She stared at him like she didn't trust what she was hearing, which, honestly, was fair. So he made it simple. "No deals," he said. "No trust clauses. No dead men arranging our lives. Just dinner tomorrow night, if you want to start over." For a second, she didn't move. Then she laughed, a real laugh this time, warm and startled and a little broken around the edges. "I think," she said,
wiping quickly at one eye. "You are the most inconvenient man I've ever met." "Yeah," he said. "You married me anyway." From inside the townhouse, Owen's voice floated sleepily down the hall. "Are you two being weird out there?" Amelia covered her mouth, laughing harder now. Daniel shook his head and called back, "Go to sleep." Owen answered, "If you're gonna kiss, I don't want details." Amelia nearly dropped her coffee. Daniel laughed for what felt like the first clean time in years. And standing there under the city lights, beside a woman he never should have met under the circumstances they had, he finally understood something grief had been trying to teach him all along. Sometimes the life that saves you doesn't arrive gently. Sometimes it crashes through the front door, wearing the face of everything you learned not to trust. Sometimes it asks too much. Sometimes it comes wrapped in old damage, impossible choices, and people who should have known better. But when it is real, when it is finally real, it stops feeling like rescue and starts feeling like home. So Daniel took Amelia's hand, not because a contract required it, not because a dying man once demanded it, but because for the first time in a very long while, holding on didn't feel like losing. If you were in his place, what would you have done?